Nobody in this building is going to help you." The words came from somewhere above her, from a man whose shadow blocked the overhead lights in courtroom 4B. She was on the floor, marble, cold, harder than she'd expected when her shoulder had connected with it 3 seconds ago. Her cheek throbbed where his palm had landed, a sharp heat spreading across her face in a pattern she would later describe with clinical precision in her written statement. She touched her lip. Her fingers came away with blood. The courtroom had erupted into chaos around her. Someone was screaming. Multiple someones, actually. The judge was pounding her gavel with a force that suggested the wood might splinter. Cell phones had emerged from pockets and purses throughout the gallery, their cameras pointed at the scene unfolding near the back exit. The man standing over her wore a sergeant's uniform, badge number 4291 visible on his chest. His name tag read, Morton. His face was flushed with a rage that had not yet begun to recede, his right hand still slightly raised from the blow he had just delivered. She did not scramble backward, did not cry out, did not give him the reaction his violence was designed to provoke. Instead, she looked at her watch, noted the time. 10:47 a.m., she said, her voice carrying clearly across the courtroom despite the noise. October 17th, Sergeant Morton, badge 4291. Assault and battery in courtroom 4B, Grand County Courthouse. She turned her head slightly, making sure the cell phone cameras could capture her face, her split lip, the man looming above her. "I have witnesses." Something shifted in Morton's expression. The rage didn't disappear, but something else crept in alongside it. Something that might have been the first flicker of doubt. Behind him, on the wall near the judge's bench, a posted notice in a brass frame caught the fluorescent light. She had read it when she entered the courtroom 40 minutes ago. Now she recited it from memory, loud enough for every recording device to capture. Pursuant to Georgia Code Section 15-1-10, all persons shall conduct themselves with decorum in this courtroom. Physical contact with any individual is prohibited and may result in criminal prosecution. The judge's gavel finally achieved silence. "Bailiffs," Judge Helen Carter commanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Restrain that officer, now!" 2 bailiffs rushed forward, their movements suggesting they wished they had acted sooner. Morton didn't resist as they pulled him back from the woman on the floor, but his eyes never left her face. She sat up slowly, touched her cheek again. The heat was spreading, would become a bruise by evening. She noted this too, filed it away with everything else she had been filing away for 26 months. A civilian woman reached down to help her stand. She accepted the assistance with a quiet thank you, then straightened her blazer, smoothed her skirt, and took inventory. Nothing broken, nothing permanently damaged. The blood from her lip had stained her collar slightly. Evidence. "Ma'am, are you all right? Should I call 911? The civilian woman was middle-aged, white, her face pale with shock. "That won't be necessary." She wiped her lip with the back of her hand, leaving a red smear across her dark skin. "I believe the situation is being documented." She looked at the gallery, at the forest of phones still recording, at the 24 witnesses who had just watched a uniformed officer assault an unarmed woman in open court, at the evidence she had not planned to gather today but would certainly use. Then she looked at Sergeant Morton, still being held by the bailiffs, still staring at her with an expression that had shifted from rage to something more complicated. He knew what he had just done. He knew it had been captured from multiple angles. What he did not know, what he could not possibly have known, was who he had just hit. She knew what he had just cost himself. He had no idea what he had just handed her. 6 hours earlier, at 6:14 a.m., the apartment was quiet except for the soft gurgle of a coffee maker completing its cycle. She had measured the grounds the night before, set the timer, laid out her clothes on the chair beside her bed. Gray blazer, white blouse, navy skirt that fell 2 inches below the knee, sensible flats, nothing memorable, nothing that would draw attention. Mira Okonkwo moved through her morning routine with the efficiency of long practice. Shower at 6:02, dressed by 6:18. Coffee poured at 6:22. The newspaper waited on her kitchen table, folded to the Metro section, where a small article on page 4 detailed ongoing concerns about courthouse security in Grand County. She read it while she ate her toast, made no notes, committed the relevant details to memory. The apartment itself was spare, functional. A one-bedroom unit in a complex 12 miles from the courthouse, chosen for its proximity to 3 different highway exits and its lack of security cameras in the parking lot. The furniture was rental standard. The walls held no photographs. The refrigerator contained exactly what a single woman living alone might be expected to keep: milk, eggs, leftover takeout containers, a half-empty bottle of wine that had been open for 3 weeks. Anyone searching this apartment would find nothing remarkable. That was the point. At 6:45, she gathered her things into her bag. The bag itself was unremarkable, a brown leather tote purchased from a department store 3 years ago, worn enough to suggest regular use. Inside, she arranged items in a specific order: wallet on the left, phone in the center pocket, keys in the small zippered compartment, legal pad and pen on the right, a protein bar in case the morning ran long, a small umbrella despite the clear forecast. The order never varied. She had learned, years ago in a different context, that routine created its own camouflage. People noticed disruptions in patterns. They rarely noticed the patterns themselves. She locked her apartment door, tested the handle twice, and walked to her car. A silver Honda Civic, 8 years old, unremarkable in every way. The kind of car that disappeared in any parking lot, that drew no second glances, that suggested its owner was neither wealthy nor destitute. Before getting in, she paused, looked at the parking lot's perimeter, noted the position of other vehicles, the sight lines to the street, the 3 routes she could take to exit. This too was habit, the kind of habit that became invisible with enough repetition. The drive to the courthouse took 37 minutes. She listened to the news on the radio, nothing unusual, traffic and weather and political speculation, the ordinary sounds of an ordinary morning. At 7:42, she pulled into the courthouse parking lot, found a space in the 3rd row, near a concrete pillar that partially obscured her vehicle from the building's external cameras. She sat for a moment, reviewing what she knew about the day ahead. She was here to testify in a traffic case, a fender bender she had witnessed 4 months ago on the corner of Maple and 5th. 2 vehicles, minor damage, no injuries. The kind of case that normally settled before trial, but had somehow escalated into a courtroom proceeding because one party refused to accept fault. Her role was simple. She had seen the accident. She would describe what she had seen. She would leave. That was the official version, the version that existed on paper, in court records, in the witness list filed by the plaintiff's attorney. The other version was more complicated, but no one needed to know about the other version. Not yet. At 7:58, she gathered her bag and walked toward the courthouse entrance. Grand County Courthouse had been built in 1923, a monument to civic ambition rendered in gray granite and white marble. The building occupied an entire city block, its facade decorated with Greek columns and carved eagles, and the words "Equal Justice Under Law" chiseled above the main entrance. The words had always struck her as aspirational rather than descriptive. The security checkpoint just inside the main doors was staffed by 4 people, 2 deputies running the metal detectors, 1 bailiff monitoring the X-ray machine, and a supervisor seated at a desk reviewing the daily docket. The line stretched 15 deep when she arrived, a mix of attorneys with briefcases, defendants with nervous expressions, and witnesses clutching subpoenas like talismans. She took her place at the end of the line, waited. The line moved slowly, too slowly for the morning hour, too slowly for a courthouse that processed hundreds of people daily. She watched the security personnel work and understood why. The white man in the business suit 3 places ahead of her was waved through the metal detector without emptying his pockets. The white woman behind him, carrying a large purse, had her bag placed on the X-ray belt but was not asked to remove her shoes or submit to additional screening. The black man directly ahead of her was pulled aside. Secondary screening. Wand. Pat down. His briefcase opened and searched by hand while he stood with his arms extended, his face carefully blank. She noted the badge number of the bailiff conducting the search. Wells Hart, according to his name tag. A heavy-set man in his 50s, with the kind of casual authority that suggested he had occupied this post for many years. When her turn came, she placed her bag on the X-ray belt and stepped through the metal detector. It did not beep. She had no metal on her body, having removed her watch and placed it in her bag before approaching. "Hold on," Hart said. "Step over here." She stepped where he indicated. A secondary screening area, separated from the main line by a waist-high partition. "Arms out." She extended her arms. Hart ran the wand over her body, slowly, thoroughly. It did not beep. There was nothing to find. "Bag search," he announced to no one in particular. Another deputy retrieved her bag from the end of the X-ray belt. He unzipped it and began removing items, placing each one on a small table. Wallet, phone, keys, legal pad, pen, protein bar, umbrella. "What's this?" He held up her phone. "A phone. What's it for?" She looked at him, did not allow her expression to change. "Communication, like most phones." His jaw tightened slightly. He set the phone down harder than necessary, picked up the legal pad. "What are these notes?" "Personal records, not relevant to anything in this building." "I'll decide what's relevant." He flipped through the pages. The notes were written in a shorthand that would mean nothing to him even if he could read her handwriting. Grocery lists, apparently. Appointment reminders. The mundane details of an ordinary life. He found nothing because there was nothing to find. The pad was a decoy. Her actual notes were encrypted on her phone, backed up to a secure server every 30 seconds, invisible to anyone without the proper credentials. After 4 minutes of searching, they released her. Her belongings were not repacked neatly, but rather shoved toward her across the table, items jumbled together. "Have a nice day," Hart said. His tone made the words an insult. She repacked her bag in its proper order. Wallet on the left, phone in the center pocket, keys in the zippered compartment, legal pad and pen on the right. Before walking away, she looked at Hart directly, held his gaze for 2 seconds, said nothing. Then she proceeded toward the information desk, her flats clicking softly against the marble floor. If this story already has your attention, hit that subscribe button now because you won't want to miss what happens when she walks into that courtroom. The information desk was staffed by a woman whose name tag identified her as Lila Fairbanks, chief clerk. She was perhaps 50, blonde hair styled into precise waves, makeup applied with careful attention. Her smile as she looked up was bright and practiced, the kind of smile that did not quite reach the eyes. "Good morning," she said. "How can I help you?" "I'm here as a witness in the Martinez case, courtroom 4B. I need to confirm the hearing time." Fairbanks consulted her computer screen. Her expression shifted subtly as she processed what she was seeing. The smile remained, but something behind it cooled. "The witness waiting area is down the hall," she said, pointing. "Not up here with the attorneys." "I didn't ask about the waiting area. I asked about the hearing time." The smile tightened. 9:30. But witnesses typically wait in the designated area until they're called. It's more appropriate." More appropriate. The phrase hung in the air, weighted with implications. "Thank you for the information." She turned and walked toward the hallway Fairbanks had indicated. Behind her, she heard Fairbanks speaking to someone. Low tones, not meant to be overheard. Something about difficult people. Something about not knowing their place. She noted this too. Filed it with everything else. The witness waiting area was exactly what the name suggested. A room with hard plastic chairs, a water cooler, and a television mounted high on the wall playing a morning news program with the sound muted. 3 other people occupied the space. 2 white women seated near the window, speaking in hushed tones about something involving a neighbor's dog. A white man in his 60s reading a paperback novel. All 3 looked up when she entered, their gazes held for a moment longer than necessary before returning to their previous activities. She chose a seat near the corner, close to both the main entrance and the emergency exit. placed her bag on the floor beside her, retrieved her legal pad and pen. For the next 40 minutes, she wrote notes that appeared to be case-related observations, but were actually encrypted shorthand documenting everything she had seen since arriving. The secondary screening, Hart's badge number, Fairbanks's comments, the differential treatment of white versus black visitors at security. This was the work. Not dramatic confrontations or smoking gun evidence. Just observation, documentation, the patient accumulation of facts that, taken together, painted a picture. At 8:52, a deputy entered the waiting area. Not the same deputy who had searched her bag, but a younger man, perhaps 30, with the kind of crisp uniform and eager posture that suggested he was still early in his career. He approached the two white women first, checked their subpoenas, confirmed their case numbers, directed them to their respective courtrooms with friendly efficiency. He approached the older white man second. Same procedure, same pleasant demeanor. Then he approached her. "Ma'am, I need to see some identification." She looked up from her legal pad. "I haven't been called to testify yet." "Standard procedure, witness verification." She set her pen down. "Under Georgia Code Section 24-13-90, witness identification is verified at the time of testimony by the court clerk, not in the waiting area by law enforcement." The deputy's expression flickered. He had not expected pushback. Perhaps he had not expected her to know the relevant statute. "I'm just following protocol, ma'am." "Your protocol contradicts state law." She nodded toward the wall behind him, where a framed notice detailed witness rights and procedures. "It's posted right there." He turned, looked at the notice, turned back. His face had reddened slightly. "I'm going to need your name at least." "My name is in the court record. I'm a subpoenaed witness in the Martinez case. That information is available to you through proper channels." For a moment, he seemed uncertain how to proceed. His hand moved toward the radio on his belt, then stopped. He glanced toward the doorway, as if hoping a supervisor might appear to resolve the situation. "I'm going to have to ask you to wait here," he said finally. "That's exactly what I was doing before you approached me." He turned and left the waiting area. She watched him go, then returned to her notes. At 9:07, a different person entered the room. This one was not a deputy, but a clerk, a young woman with a tablet computer and an apologetic expression. "Martinez witnesses? Courtroom 4B is running a few minutes behind. We'll call you when we're ready." The two white women nodded. The older man grunted acknowledgement. She said nothing. At 9:23, the clerk returned, called the older man first, then one of the white women, then the other. At 9:41, she was still waiting. The television on the wall had shifted from morning news to some kind of talk show. She had stopped paying attention to it 20 minutes ago. Her legal pad was nearly full. At 9:44, the door opened again. Not the clerk this time. A deputy she had not seen before, older with a clipboard and the kind of expression that suggested he was not accustomed to having his authority questioned. His name tag read, Pike. "Ma'am," he consulted his clipboard, "I need to verify your identification before you can be called to testify." She set her pen down for the second time that morning. "You're the third person to make that request. My answer hasn't changed." Pike's jaw tightened. "I'm not asking. Standard procedure." "Your standard procedure contradicts Georgia Code Section 24-13-90. She pointed to the wall notice again. "Witness identification is verified at time of testimony by the court clerk in the courtroom, not in the waiting area." "Are you refusing a lawful order?" "I'm declining a request that exceeds your current authority." She picked up her pen again, looked back at her notes. "When I'm formally called to testify, I'll comply with all appropriate court procedures." Pike stepped closer. Stepped E. Not close enough to be threatening, but close enough to establish his physical presence in her space. "You think you know the law better than me?" She looked up, met his eyes. "I know what's posted on that wall. I assume you can read it too." His face went red. A vein pulsed visibly at his temple. "You're going to want to watch your attitude." "I'm sitting in a waiting area, reading a legal pad, answering your questions calmly and completely. My attitude is not the issue here." For a long moment they stared at each other. She did not look away, did not blink, did not give him the satisfaction of seeing her intimidated. Finally, Pike pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Pike. I'm in witness waiting area 3. Got a situation with an uncooperative witness. Requesting supervisor." He kept his eyes on her as he spoke. She kept her expression neutral, her breathing steady. Whatever happened next, she would document it. Whatever they did, she would use it. That was the work. The supervisor arrived 7 minutes later. He was older than Pike, perhaps mid-50s, with silver temples and a uniform that bore sergeant's stripes. His name tag read Morton. He entered the waiting area with the kind of stride that suggested he was accustomed to having rooms rearrange themselves around his presence. Pike stepped aside immediately, deferential. "What's the problem here?" Pike gestured toward her. "This witness refuses to provide identification, claims she knows the law better than we do." Morton looked at her, took in her appearance with a slow, assessing gaze that started at her shoes and moved upward. His expression gave nothing away, but something in his eyes suggested he had already formed conclusions about her, about who she was, about how this interaction would proceed. "Ma'am." He stopped 3 feet from her chair. "I'm Sergeant Morton. I understand there's been some confusion about our identification procedures." No confusion. She did not stand, did not change her posture. "Georgia Code Section 24-13-90 is quite clear. I've offered to comply with all appropriate court procedures at the appropriate time. And I'm telling you the appropriate time is now. With respect, Sergeant, the statute disagrees with you." Morton's nostrils flared slightly. A small tell, but she caught it. He was not accustomed to being contradicted, particularly not by someone who looked like her, in a room where he held all the apparent power. "Let me explain something to you." He took another step forward. "This is my courthouse, my security, my procedures. If I tell you to show ID, you show ID. That's how it works." She looked at him steadily. "This is a county courthouse. It belongs to the citizens of Grand County, and your procedures, whatever they may be, cannot supersede state law. You think you're a lawyer now? I think I can read a posted notice." She pointed to the wall again. "That sign has been there longer than either of us has been in this building. The law hasn't changed since this morning." Morton glanced at the notice, glanced back at her. His jaw worked silently for a moment. "Stand up." "Am I being detained?" The question hung in the air. Both Pike and Morton stiffened. It was the question that complicated everything, the question that separated lawful authority from something else entirely. "I'm asking you to stand up." "And I'm asking if I'm being detained. It's a simple question, Sergeant. Yes or no?" Morton's hand moved to his belt, not to his weapon, but to the radio clipped beside it. The gesture was deliberate, meant to remind her of the resources at his disposal. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "I'm sitting in a chair, reading a legal pad, waiting to be called as a witness in a traffic case." She kept her voice level, calm. "I'm not sure how I could make that any simpler." For a moment, she thought he might reach for her. The tension in his body suggested he wanted to, that some part of him was calculating whether he could get away with it. Then a voice came from the doorway. "Is there a problem here?" Everyone turned. The speaker was an older man in an expensive suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, his posture suggesting authority that outranked everyone else in the room. She did not recognize him, but the way Pike and Morton immediately straightened told her everything she needed to know about his position. "No problem, Deputy Chief." Morton's voice had shifted, become more controlled. "Just verifying witness identification." "Deputy Chief." She noted this, filed it. The man in the suit walked closer, his eyes moving between Morton, Pike, and the woman seated in the corner chair. His gaze lingered on her for a moment, assessing. "Ma'am, I'm Deputy Chief Sloan Avery. I apologize if there's been any misunderstanding." His smile was practiced, professional. We take security very seriously here. I'm sure you understand. I understand perfectly. She did not return the smile. I've been waiting to testify in a traffic case. Your officers have approached me 3 times demanding identification, despite the posted notice indicating such verification occurs in the courtroom. Avery's smile flickered. He glanced at Morton, then at the wall notice, then back at her. Well, procedures can sometimes be interpreted differently by different people. He clasped his hands in front of him, the gesture of a politician preparing to smooth things over. I'm sure we can resolve this amicably. If you just show some ID, we can get you into that courtroom and on your way. She considered the offer, considered what showing her ID would accomplish. It would end this immediate confrontation, yes. It would get her into the courtroom, yes. It would also establish a precedent. It would teach these officers that persistence and pressure worked, that rules could be bent when applied to certain people, that authority always won. No, she said. Avery blinked. Excuse me? I said no. I'm not required to show identification at this time, in this location, under these circumstances. The law is clear. Your officers' demands are not lawful orders. My refusal is not disorderly conduct, and this conversation is starting to feel like harassment. The word landed like a stone in still water. Avery's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. That's a serious accusation. It's a statement of fact. She stood now, finally, gathering her bag from the floor. I've been singled out for secondary screening, subjected to multiple identification demands that weren't made of other witnesses, and am currently being surrounded by 3 uniformed officers for the crime of sitting quietly in a waiting area. She looked at each of them in turn. Morton, Pike, Avery. If I'm being detained, arrest me. If I'm not, I'm going to walk to Courtroom 4B and wait to be called to testify. Those are the only 2 options. Silence stretched through the room. Somewhere in the distance, a phone rang. The television continued its muted broadcast. Outside, the ordinary business of the courthouse continued, oblivious to what was happening in this small room. Finally, Avery spoke. You're not being detained. The words came out stiffly, as if they cost him something. You're free to go to the courtroom. She nodded once, did not thank him, did not acknowledge the concession as anything other than what it was, a temporary retreat by men who had expected to win. She walked toward the door. Morton stepped aside to let her pass, but not quite enough. She had to angle her body slightly to avoid brushing against him. As she passed, he spoke quietly, for her ears only. This isn't over. She did not respond, did not look at him, just kept walking. Behind her, she heard Avery's voice, low and tight. Morton, my office. Now. Courtroom 4B was smaller than she had expected, a wood-paneled room with seating for perhaps 50 spectators, and a raised bench where Judge Helen Carter presided over the morning's proceedings. The Martinez case was already in progress when she entered, the plaintiff's attorney questioning a witness about road conditions at the time of the accident. She slipped into a seat at the back of the gallery, as far from the door as possible, while still maintaining a clear view of both exits. Her bag rested on her lap, zipper partially open for quick access to her phone. For the next 40 minutes, she watched and waited. The case was straightforward, a dispute over liability in a minor traffic collision. The plaintiff claimed the defendant had run a red light. The defendant claimed the light had been yellow. Various witnesses offered their recollections, none of which seemed particularly reliable. At 10:23, the plaintiff's attorney called her name. She approached the witness stand, placed her left hand on the Bible offered by the court clerk, raised her right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. She sat. The plaintiff's attorney, a man in his 30s with an eager expression and an inexpensive suit, approached the witness stand. Please state your name for the record. Mira Okonkwo. Ms. Okonkwo, were you present at the intersection of Maple and 5th Street on June 14th of this year? I was. Can you tell us what you observed? She described the accident in clear, factual terms: the position of the vehicles, the color of the traffic light at the moment of impact, the sequence of events as she had witnessed them from the sidewalk where she had been standing. The defense attorney cross-examined her briefly, attempting to challenge her sightlines and her memory of the light's color. She answered each question calmly, without elaboration, without contradiction. At 10:39, the judge excused her. She thanked the court and stepped down from the witness stand. That was when she saw Morton. He was standing at the back of the courtroom just inside the door she would need to exit through. His arms were crossed. His expression was unreadable. She walked toward the exit, toward him. If you're invested in what happens next, make sure to hit that like button because this confrontation is about to change everything. She was 5 feet from the door when Morton stepped into her path. "You think you're smart." His voice was low, meant only for her. "Coming in here, making us look stupid. I testified about a car accident, that's all." "That's not all, and you know it." He moved closer. "You made Pike look like a fool. You made me look like a fool, in front of the deputy chief. I sat in a chair and declined an unlawful request. If that made anyone look foolish, perhaps the request itself was the problem." His nostrils flared. That vein at his temple pulsed again. "You know what I think? I think you came here looking for trouble. I think you're one of those people who gets off on making cops look bad. I came here to testify in a traffic case. I'm leaving now." She moved to step around him. His hand shot out, grabbed her arm just above the elbow. Hard. His fingers dug into her flesh with enough force to leave marks. "I'm not done talking to you." She looked at his hand on her arm, looked at his face, did not attempt to pull away. "Sergeant Morton, you are currently committing battery." Her voice remained steady, clear, loud enough for others in the courtroom to hear. "Under Georgia Code Section 16-5-23, simple battery is defined as intentionally causing physical harm or making physical contact of an insulting or provoking nature. I'm detaining you." "On what grounds?" "Disorderly conduct." "I'm walking toward an exit. That's not disorderly under Georgia Code Section 16-11-39. She still had not raised her voice. "Release my arm." His grip tightened instead of loosening. Behind her, she could hear the murmur of the courtroom, the shuffle of people turning to watch. Judge Carter's gavel struck once, twice. "What is going on back there?" Morton released her arm, but his body remained in her path, blocking the exit. "Nothing, Your Honor, just escorting a witness out." "Then escort her out, and do it quietly." Morton's jaw worked. He stepped aside, just barely, leaving a gap she would have to squeeze through to exit. She did not squeeze through. She stood where she was, directly in front of him, and waited. "Sergeant, you're blocking my exit." "The door's right there." "And you're standing in front of it." Behind them, Judge Carter's voice sharpened. "Sergeant Morton, step away from that witness immediately, or I will hold you in contempt of court." For a long moment, Morton did not move. His eyes bored into hers, filled with a rage that seemed entirely disproportionate to the situation. She had declined to show ID. She had cited a statute. She had walked to a courtroom and testified about a car accident. None of this warranted the fury radiating from him, unless it was not about what she had done today, unless it was about what she represented, unless the mere fact of her refusal to submit, her insistence on rights he did not believe she deserved, had triggered something that had been building for years. She had seen it before, documented it 43 times in 26 months. The pattern was always the same. Finally, he stepped aside. Fully aside this time, leaving the door completely unobstructed. She walked past him, did not look back, reached for the door handle. His hand caught her shoulder from behind, spun her around, and then his palm connected with her face. "Chapter P.O." The slap echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Her head snapped to the side. Her body followed, momentum carrying her off balance. Her shoulder hit the courtroom door, and then she was falling, marble floor rising up to meet her. The pain was immediate and clarifying. Her cheek, where his palm had landed, her lip split by the impact, her shoulder bruised by the door, her hip throbbing where it had struck the floor. She lay there for 1 second. 2. Let the chaos wash over her without responding to it, screaming. The judge's gavel pounding, cell phones emerging from pockets, Morton's heavy breathing above her. "Stay down." She opened her eyes, looked up at him, saw the man standing over her, saw the rage still twisting his features, saw the moment beginning to dawn on him that he had made a catastrophic error. She sat up, slowly, deliberately, touched her lip, saw the blood on her fingers, looked at her watch. 10:47 a.m., October 17th. Sergeant Morton, Badge 4291. Assault and battery in Courtroom 4B, Grand County Courthouse. The bailiffs were rushing forward now. Judge Carter was on her feet, her gavel forgotten. The gallery was a sea of raised phones, dozens of cameras capturing everything. "I have witnesses," she said. Morton's hand reached for her again, whether to strike or grab she never knew, because 2 bailiffs caught him from behind and dragged him backward. "Detain that officer," Judge Carter commanded. "Someone call 911 and get that woman medical attention." A civilian woman was kneeling beside her now, the same middle-aged woman who had been watching the traffic case. Her face was pale, shocked. "Ma'am, are you okay? Should I call an ambulance?" She considered the question, assessed her injuries. Split lip, probable bruising on her cheek, shoulder, hip. Nothing broken, nothing requiring emergency medical care. "That won't be necessary." She wiped her lip again. "But I would appreciate help standing up." The woman helped her to her feet. She straightened her blazer, smoothed her skirt, picked up her bag from where it had fallen. Deputy Chief Avery pushed through the courtroom door, his face ashen. "What the hell happened here?" "Sergeant Morton assaulted a witness in open court." Judge Carter's voice was ice. "I want him arrested. I want this documented. And I want to know how a uniformed officer was allowed to terrorize a civilian in my courtroom." Avery's eyes found her, found the blood on her lip, the red mark on her cheek, the calm expression on her face. "Ma'am, I'm sure this was a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding." She pointed to the gallery, to the phones still recording. Multiple cameras captured a felony battery. Georgia Code Section 16-5-23.1 makes battery against a person in a courthouse a felony offense. She reached into her bag, pulled out her phone. The screen showed a voice recording app, timestamp running. "I've also been recording audio since I arrived at this courthouse this morning. Every conversation, every demand for identification, every unlawful order." Avery's face went from ashen to gray. You can't. Georgia is a one-party consent state, but what, Deputy Chief?" She slipped the phone back into her bag. "You were about to say something about the law. Please, continue." He did not continue. He stood there, surrounded by witnesses and cameras, and the wreckage of whatever narrative he had been preparing to construct, and said nothing. The bailiffs were leading Morton away now. He was not resisting, but his eyes never left her face. The rage had cooled into something else, something that recognized, perhaps for the first time, that he had made a mistake. He just did not yet understand how big. The next 2 hours were a blur of statements and documentation. She was escorted to a courthouse security office, where a young deputy took her statement 3 times. 3 identical statements, delivered in the same calm, factual tone. At 11:30, a new face appeared. A woman in her 40s, dressed in business casual rather than uniform, with a badge clipped to her belt that identified her as Internal Affairs. "Ms. Okonkwo, I'm Sergeant Corinne Vance, IA office. I'd like to record your statement, if you're willing." "Of course." Vance set up a small digital recorder, stated the date, time, and participants for the record, and asked her to describe the events of the morning from the beginning. She did. Security screening. Security. Hart's secondary search. Fairbanks's comments. Pike's demands. Morton's escalation. Avery's intervention. The confrontation in the courtroom. The assault. Every detail, delivered with precision. Every timestamp noted. Every badge number cited. When she finished, Vance sat back in her chair. Her expression was carefully neutral, but something in her eyes suggested she was seeing things she had seen before. Ms. Okonkwo, I have to ask. You seem remarkably composed for someone who was just assaulted. Should I be hysterical? No, most people would be more shaken. I've found that emotional responses don't serve me well in situations like this. She paused. Documentation does. Vance studied her for a long moment. Then she pulled out a tablet, began scrolling through something. I'm looking at the equipment log for today. Her brow furrowed. According to this, Sergeant Morton's body camera was malfunctioning between 10:15 and 11:02 a.m. She felt her jaw tighten slightly, but kept her expression neutral. That's quite a coincidence. 47 minutes of missing footage, covering exactly the period when you were harassed in the waiting area and assaulted in the courtroom. How unfortunate. Vance looked up from her tablet. Their eyes met. A moment of understanding passed between them, unspoken but clear. Fortunately, Vance said slowly, there were approximately 24 civilian witnesses in the courtroom, and based on what I'm seeing online, at least 15 of them uploaded video within the first 30 minutes. She nodded. I assumed as much. The footage shows everything. Morton blocking your exit, grabbing your shoulder, striking your face. Vance set the tablet down. It also shows you remaining calm throughout, citing statutes, documenting his badge number from the floor. That seemed like the appropriate response. Ms. Okonkwo. Vance leaned forward. Who are you? The question hung in the air. She considered her answer carefully. I'm a witness in a traffic case. I came to testify about a fender bender I saw 4 months ago. That's what you were doing here today. That's not who you are. She met Vance's gaze, held it for 3 seconds. 4. Right now, I'm a victim of assault. That's the relevant identity for this investigation. Vance studied her for another long moment. Then she nodded slowly, accepting the non-answer. Fair enough. For now. She closed her tablet. Morton's been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Deputy Chief Avery has taken personal charge of the case, which... She hesitated. Which concerns you. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed because what happens next will completely change how you see this case. At 12:45, she was finally released from the security office. A deputy escorted her to the main entrance, where a small cluster of reporters had already gathered. She declined comment, walked to her car, sat in the driver's seat for 5 minutes, processing. Her cheek throbbed. Her lip had stopped bleeding but was swelling. Her shoulder ached where it had hit the door. She pulled out her phone. Not the phone she had shown Avery, the one with the voice recording app. A different phone, pulled from a hidden pocket in her bag. A phone that was registered to no name she had ever used in this county. She typed a message. 3 words. Contact made. Proceeding. The response came within 30 seconds. Understood. Team standing by. She deleted both messages, returned the phone to its hidden pocket. Then she started her car and drove away from the courthouse, watching in her rearview mirror as the building grew smaller and finally disappeared. 26 months of work, 43 documented victims, hundreds of hours of observation and documentation. And now, finally, she had what she needed. Not just evidence of harassment or discrimination or petty corruption. Evidence of felony assault, captured on video, committed by a sergeant with 17 previous excessive force complaints. Evidence that would open doors. Evidence that would justify subpoenas. Evidence that would turn suspicion into investigation, investigation into prosecution. Morton had given her a gift today. He just did not know it yet. None of them did. The apartment was quiet when she returned. She went directly to the bathroom, examined her face in the mirror. The bruise was forming on her left cheek, a dark purple already spreading beneath her brown skin. Her lower lip was swollen, the split visible as a thin red line. She photographed the injuries from multiple angles, uploaded the images to a secure server, added notes with timestamps, descriptions, chain of custody documentation. Then she showered, changed into comfortable clothes, made herself a cup of tea. At 3:17 p.m. her phone buzzed. The hidden phone, the one registered to no name. Briefing scheduled, 0600 tomorrow. Secure location. She typed her response. Confirmed. Bringing evidence. Then she sat in her apartment, drinking tea, watching the afternoon light shift across the walls. Outside, traffic hummed. Somewhere, a dog barked. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary day. She thought about Morton, about the rage in his eyes, about the way he had looked at her from the floor, as if she were something less than human, something that deserved to be struck down. She thought about the 43 people whose complaints she had documented over 26 months, the arrests made without probable cause, the searches conducted without warrants, the force used without justification, the bodies bruised, the lives disrupted, the justice denied. She thought about the system that protected men like Morton, the brotherhood that closed ranks, the supervisors who signed off on misconduct, the records that disappeared, the cameras that malfunctioned, the witnesses who were discredited. And she thought about what came next. The briefing tomorrow, the evidence she would present, the case she had been building, piece by piece, documented incident by documented incident, for over 2 years. Today had been unexpected. She had not planned to become a victim. She had planned to remain invisible, to observe and document and wait for the right moment to reveal what she had gathered. But Morton had changed that. Morton had assaulted her in open court, in front of cameras and witnesses and a judge. Morton had given her something she could not have manufactured: direct, personal, undeniable evidence of the very misconduct she had been investigating. She finished her tea, set the cup in the sink. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The building was nondescript, a 3-story office complex in a business park 12 miles from the courthouse. No signage indicated what organizations occupied its various suites. The parking lot was sparsely populated at 6 a.m., as it was designed to be. She parked in a space near the back entrance, walked to a door marked with no number, no name, pressed her thumb to a small sensor panel. The door clicked open. Inside, a hallway led to a conference room where 3 people were already waiting. 2 men and 1 woman, all in business attire, all with the kind of posture that suggested they had spent significant time in positions requiring alertness. Agent Okonkwo, the older man, seated at the head of the table, gestured to an empty chair. "Thank you for coming." She took the seat, placed a folder on the table in front of her. "I have updates. We saw the video." The woman, seated to the left, pulled up something on a tablet. "Every major news outlet has run it. Social media views are in the millions. Morton's been placed on administrative leave. Deputy Chief Avery is personally overseeing the investigation." The older man's expression darkened. "Avery, that's problematic." "Agreed." She opened the folder, began spreading documents across the table. "But it also presents an opportunity. Avery was the reviewing officer on 14 of Morton's 17 previous excessive force complaints, all ruled unfounded." She pointed to a spreadsheet. "Pattern analysis shows that Avery has reviewed 31 excessive force complaints over the past 5 years. Of those, 28 were ruled unfounded. The remaining 3 resulted in written reprimands only, no suspensions, no terminations." The woman whistled softly. "That's a 90% dismissal rate. County average is 62%. It gets better." She pulled out another document. "Financial records show irregular deposits to Morton's personal account over the past 18 months. $47,000 total, in amounts ranging from $2,000 to $5,000. All from a shell company connected to a bail bond operation we've already flagged for other violations. The older man leaned forward. You're suggesting Morton was on the take. I'm documenting patterns. The interpretation is for prosecutors. She set down another page. What I can confirm is that Morton's behavior yesterday was consistent with the pattern we've been investigating. Targeted harassment of black citizens, unlawful demands for identification, escalation when challenged, physical violence when thwarted. She paused, looked around the table. The difference yesterday is that he did it to me, in open court, on camera. The room was silent for a moment. Then the woman spoke. Your cover is potentially compromised if they start digging into who you are. They'll find Mira Okonkwo, private citizen, witness in a traffic case. Nothing more. She pulled out her phone, the one she had shown Avery. This device contains nothing sensitive. My documentation is on separate systems, backed up to secure servers. Everything I gathered yesterday is already preserved. And if they dig deeper, start asking questions about your background? My background will withstand scrutiny. It's been constructed specifically for that purpose. The older man nodded slowly. What's your assessment of next steps? She considered the question. Thought about Morton, sitting at home on administrative leave. About Avery, managing the investigation that would determine his subordinate's fate. About the courthouse, continuing its daily business as if nothing had happened. Morton's assault gives us an entry point. A federal civil rights investigation can be justified based on yesterday's incident alone. Once we're inside, we can expand the scope to cover the pattern we've already documented. The DOJ won't authorize a pattern or practice investigation based on one assault. No, but they'll authorize it based on 43 documented incidents, financial irregularities, and evidence of supervisory cover-up. She tapped the folder. Morton's assault isn't the case, it's the key that opens the door to the case. The woman leaned back in her chair. You've been building this for 26 months, waiting for the right moment, and Morton handed it to you. Morton handed it to the 43 victims whose complaints were ignored. I'm just the one who documented the pattern. The older man stood, walked to the window, looked out at the parking lot, the ordinary morning, the world going about its business. We'll need to brief the U.S. Attorney's Office, get authorization for expanded investigation. He turned back to face her. This is going to take months, maybe longer. You're prepared for that? I've been prepared for 26 months. He nodded. Then let's begin. The next 48 hours were a blur of activity. Briefings with federal prosecutors, coordination with the FBI's Civil Rights Division, preparation of the evidence packages that would justify expanded investigation. At the courthouse, Morton remained on administrative leave. The civilian video continued to circulate online, generating outrage and commentary and the kind of public attention that made cover-ups difficult. Avery held a press conference expressing concern and promising a thorough investigation. His words were carefully chosen, designed to suggest accountability while committing to nothing. She watched the press conference from the secure facility, surrounded by colleagues who had spent years studying patterns just like this one. Same script, the woman observed. Express concern, promise investigation, hope it blows over. It won't blow over this time. She pointed to the screen, where a chyron displayed the number of video views. 12 million people have watched that assault. They're going to want answers. And what happens when they start asking who you are? The woman who stayed so calm while being beaten? She shrugged. They'll find a private citizen who knew her rights and documented her experience. Nothing more. For now. For as long as necessary. That evening, she returned to her apartment. Checked her injuries in the mirror. The bruise had darkened, spreading across her cheekbone in shades of purple and black. The swelling in her lip had reduced slightly. Her phone buzzed. The hidden phone. The hidden hearing scheduled. Federal magistrate, 48 hours. She read the message twice, then typed her response. Ready. 48 hours. Then everything would change. She set the phone down, looked at her reflection in the mirror. At the bruises, the evidence written on her skin. Morton thought he had taught her a lesson. Thought he had shown her who had power and who did not. Thought he had put her in her place. He had no idea. He had no idea that she had spent 26 months documenting his crimes. No idea that his assault had given her exactly what she needed to take the investigation public. No idea that in 48 hours she would walk into a federal courtroom and reveal who she really was. No idea that the woman he had struck in Courtroom 4B was the FBI agent who had been investigating him all along. She touched her bruised cheek. Felt the pain, still sharp, still present. Evidence. Everything was evidence now. And the case was just beginning. The 48 hours passed with the strange compression of time that accompanies major operations. Briefings blurred into document reviews. Secure phone calls overlapped with evidence authentication procedures. Sleep came in fragments, 2 hours here, 90 minutes there, caught between the demands of a case that had suddenly accelerated beyond anyone's original timeline. On the morning of the hearing, she woke at 4:37 a.m., 12 minutes before her alarm was set to sound. Her body had learned, over years of operational work, to anticipate significant events. Rest became impossible once the mind began cataloging everything that needed to happen. She showered, dressed in a charcoal suit she had purchased specifically for this occasion, fitted properly, professional without being severe. Applied minimal makeup, just enough to look presentable on camera. The bruise on her cheek had faded to a yellowish brown, still visible, but no longer the angry purple it had been 2 days ago. At 5:15, she reviewed the evidence binders one final time. Case file FC 2022-0847, containing 26 months of documentation, 43 victim statements, cross-referenced with incident reports, body cam footage gaps, and financial records. The timeline she had constructed day by day, showing the pattern of misconduct that connected Sergeant Morton to a network of corruption extending through multiple levels of the Grand County courthouse system. At 5:45, a black sedan arrived outside her apartment. She gathered her materials and walked to the waiting vehicle. The driver was a young agent she recognized from the briefings, a former military intelligence officer named Torres, who had been assigned to operational security for the hearing. He nodded as she climbed into the back seat, but did not speak. Silence was protocol during transport. The drive to the federal building took 23 minutes. Atlanta traffic was light at this hour, the highways not yet clogged with morning commuters. She watched the city slide past her window, the office towers and residential neighborhoods and industrial zones that she had spent 26 months observing, documenting, learning. Today, all of that work would finally become public. The James A. Barnett Federal Building occupied an entire block of downtown Atlanta, its modernist architecture a stark contrast to the Greek Revival courthouse where Morton had assaulted her. Security here was federal, operated by U.S. Marshals rather than county deputies. The difference was immediately apparent in the professionalism of the screening process, the absence of the casual harassment she had experienced at the county courthouse. She was escorted to a conference room on the 4th floor, where the final pre-hearing briefing was already in progress. Assistant U.S. Attorney Marcus Traylor stood at the head of the table, reviewing a projected timeline on the wall screen. Agent Okonkwo. He nodded as she entered. We're on schedule. Magistrate Ross will convene at 9 a.m. You'll be called as the government's primary witness. She took her seat, opened her evidence binder. Who else is on the witness list? For this hearing, just you. We're presenting minimum necessary evidence to establish probable cause for the charges. The full case will be built over the coming months. She nodded. This was standard procedure for an emergency federal intervention. Establish probable cause. Secure custody of the primary defendant. Then begin the longer process of documenting the full scope of the conspiracy. Morton's attorney filed a motion to dismiss this morning. Traylor pulled up a document on the screen. They're arguing lack of federal jurisdiction, claiming this is a simple assault case that should be handled at the county level. The assault occurred during the course of my federal investigation. Morton was targeting me specifically because of my activities in the courthouse, which is exactly what we'll establish. Traylor closed the document. But that means revealing your identity and the scope of the investigation in open court. Once that happens, there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. She had considered this, had weighed the costs of exposure against the benefits of proceeding. The calculation had come out the same way every time. The investigation has already been compromised by Morton's actions. Continuing undercover is no longer viable. The question isn't whether to reveal the investigation, but how to maximize its impact when we do. Traylor studied her for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. Understood. Let's go make some history. The federal courtroom was smaller than the county courtroom where Morton had assaulted her, but more imposing in its austerity. No ornate woodwork, no decorative flourishes, just clean lines, functional furniture, and the weight of federal authority implicit in every surface. The gallery was restricted for this hearing. No media, no members of the public, only essential personnel, attorneys, law enforcement officers, court staff, and the defendant. Morton sat at the defense table, dressed in an orange jumpsuit that indicated he had been taken into federal custody the previous evening. His attorney, a private defense lawyer named Whitmore, who specialized in police misconduct cases, sat beside him reviewing documents. Deputy Chief Avery was present as well, seated in the first row of the gallery. His expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his posture. He did not yet know the full scope of what was about to be revealed, but he knew enough to be worried. At precisely 9 a.m., Magistrate Judge Eleanor Ross entered the courtroom. She was a woman in her 60s, appointed to the federal bench 12 years ago after a career as a prosecutor and civil rights attorney. Her reputation for fairness was matched only by her reputation for intolerance of procedural games. This hearing is called to order. She settled into her chair, reviewed the papers before her. We're here on the government's emergency motion for federal intervention in case number 4:24-CR-0847. The defendant, Sergeant Gage Morton, has been charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, Title 18, United States Code Section 242. Mr. Traylor, you may proceed. Traylor rose from the prosecution table. Thank you, Your Honor. The government calls Special Agent Mira Okonkwo, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Civil Rights Division. The words fell into silence. Morton's head snapped toward her. Avery went rigid in his seat. Whitmore's pen stopped moving mid-note. She rose from her seat at the prosecution table, walked to the witness stand, placed her hand on the Bible offered by the court clerk. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. She sat, looked at Morton, watched the realization spread across his face like cracks in ice. Traylor approached the witness stand. Please state your name and position for the record. Mira Okonkwo, Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Civil Rights Division. Badge number 7742. Agent Okonkwo, how long have you been employed by the FBI? 11 years. I've been assigned to the Civil Rights Division for the past 4 years. And what is your current assignment? For the past 26 months, I've been conducting an undercover investigation into civil rights violations at the Grand County Courthouse. Investigation file number FC 2022-0847. Traylor walked to the evidence table, picked up a thick binder. I'm showing you what's been marked as Government Exhibit 1. Can you identify this document? She opened the binder. Pages she had assembled over more than 2 years, each one representing hours of observation, documentation, verification. This is the master case file for investigation FC 2022-0847. It contains documentation of 43 incidents of civil rights violations occurring at or connected to the Grand County Courthouse between February 3, 2022 and October 15 of this year. Can you briefly describe the nature of these violations? The documented incidents include unlawful stops, illegal searches, fabricated charges, excessive use of force, and evidence tampering. The victims are predominantly black citizens who were present at the courthouse as defendants, witnesses, or visitors. The pattern of conduct suggests coordinated misconduct rather than isolated incidents. And what is Sergeant Morton's role in this pattern? She turned to a specific section of the binder. Sergeant Morton appears in 17 of the 43 documented incidents. In each case, he was either directly involved in the misconduct or present in a supervisory capacity when other officers committed violations. His body camera footage shows significant gaps corresponding to the time periods when alleged misconduct occurred. You mentioned body camera gaps. Can you elaborate? Yes. She pulled out a separate document, a spreadsheet she had compiled over months of FOIA requests and data analysis. This exhibit, marked Government 2, is a compilation of body camera footage gaps from Sergeant Morton's equipment over the past 18 months. The analysis shows 31 instances where his camera recorded no footage during periods when use of force incidents or civilian complaints were documented. 31 instances of missing footage? Correct. In each case, the equipment log indicates the camera was malfunctioning or had been manually deactivated. The probability of 31 random malfunctions occurring precisely during documented incidents is statistically negligible. Traylor let that settle before continuing. Agent Okonkwo, turning now to the incident of October 17th. Can you describe what happened that day? I was present at the Grand County Courthouse as part of my undercover investigation. My cover identity was that of a civilian witness in an unrelated traffic case. Throughout the morning, I was subjected to targeted harassment by multiple courthouse personnel, including secondary security screening, repeated demands for identification that contradicted posted court procedures, and physical intimidation. Can you identify any of the personnel involved? Yes. Bailiff Wells Hart conducted the secondary screening and searched my belongings without cause. Deputy Dorian Pike demanded identification in the witness waiting area, which violated Georgia Code Section 24-13-90. Sergeant Morton was called in as a supervisor and escalated the confrontation despite my compliance with all lawful requests. And what happened in Courtroom 4B? She took a breath. The memory was still sharp, the physical sensations still accessible despite the passage of 48 hours. After I completed my testimony in the traffic case, I attempted to leave the courtroom. Sergeant Morton blocked my exit. He verbally threatened me, then grabbed my arm with sufficient force to leave visible bruising. When I continued to attempt to leave, he struck me in the face with an open palm. The blow caused me to fall. I struck my shoulder on the courtroom door and landed on the floor. What happened after you fell? Sergeant Morton stood over me and told me to, quote, stay down, end quote. I remained on the floor, noted the time, and verbally documented his badge number and the location for the benefit of the civilian witnesses who were recording the incident on their phones. Traylor walked to the projection screen. Your Honor, the government would like to play a brief video compilation marked Government Exhibit 3. This contains footage from 4 civilian cell phones that recorded the incident. Whitmore rose. Objection. The defense has not had adequate time to review this evidence. The footage has been available online for 48 hours, Traylor responded. It's been viewed over 12 million times. The defense can hardly claim unfamiliarity. Judge Ross nodded. Overruled. Proceed. The screen flickered to life. 4 camera angles, synchronized by timestamp, showing the same scene from different perspectives. Morton blocking the exit. Morton grabbing her arm. Morton's palm connecting with her face. Her body hitting the door, falling to the floor. Morton standing over her. Her calm recitation of time and badge number. The footage ended. The courtroom was silent. Agent Okonkwo, Traylor continued, was Sergeant Morton aware that you were an FBI agent at the time of the assault? No. My undercover identity had not been compromised. Did he have any reason to assault you other than your refusal to comply with his unlawful demands? No. I had committed no crime. I had not threatened him or anyone else. My only offense was knowing my rights and documenting his violations of them. And, in your professional opinion, Was this assault an isolated incident or part of a larger pattern? She looked at Morton. He stared back at her, his face a mask of barely contained fury. It was entirely consistent with the pattern I've been documenting for 26 months. Sergeant Morton has a history of using violence against black citizens who challenge his authority. He has been the subject of 17 excessive force complaints, all of which were ruled unfounded by his supervisors. And who supervised those investigations? Deputy Chief Sloan Avery reviewed and closed 14 of the 17 complaints. In the gallery, Avery's face went pale. If you're invested in seeing justice served, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about this case. Traylor continued his examination for another 40 minutes, methodically establishing the foundation of the federal case. Financial records showing unexplained deposits to Morton's accounts. Communication logs suggesting coordination between courthouse personnel. Witness statements from victims who had been too afraid to come forward until now. When he finished, Whitmore rose for cross-examination. His approach was aggressive, attempting to paint her as a biased investigator with a personal vendetta. "Agent Okonkwo, isn't it true that you deliberately provoked my client by refusing to show identification?" "I declined an unlawful request. That's not provocation." "You cited obscure statutes. You challenged his authority in front of other officers. You made him look foolish." "I read a posted notice on the wall. If that made your client feel foolish, perhaps the problem lies with his understanding of the law he's sworn to enforce." "You're trained in self-defense, aren't you? FBI agents receive extensive combat training." "Yes. Yet you didn't defend yourself when my client allegedly struck you." "I chose not to escalate a situation that was already being documented by multiple cameras. De-escalation is also part of my training." "Or you chose to let yourself be hit so you could manufacture a case against him." She met his eyes steadily. "Your client chose to assault an unarmed woman in open court, in front of dozens of witnesses and multiple cameras. Nothing about that was manufactured." Whitmore tried several more angles of attack, but each one crumbled against the weight of documented evidence and her unshakable composure. By the time he finished, the gallery had grown visibly restless. Judge Ross called for closing arguments. Traylor kept his brief. "Your Honor, the evidence is clear. Sergeant Morton assaulted a federal agent in the course of her official duties. He did so as part of a documented pattern of civil rights violations stretching back years. The government requests that the defendant be remanded to federal custody pending trial." Whitmore argued for bail, citing Morton's 20-year career, his ties to the community, his lack of prior criminal convictions. But his words lacked conviction. The evidence was too strong. The video was too clear. Judge Ross did not deliberate long. "Based on the evidence presented, I find probable cause to believe that the defendant, Sergeant Gage Morton, committed the offense of deprivation of rights under color of law in violation of Title 18 United States Code Section 242. The defendant is remanded to federal custody. Trial date will be set at a later hearing." She struck her gavel once. Morton was led away by U.S. Marshals. His eyes found hers as he passed, filled with a hatred that would have frightened her once. Now it was just evidence. Everything was evidence. The press conference was held 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in November. The Department of Justice logo hung behind the podium, where the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia addressed a room packed with reporters. Today, the Department of Justice announces a pattern or practice investigation into the Grand County Sheriff's Office, pursuant to Title 34 United States Code Section 12601. This investigation follows evidence of systemic civil rights violations involving courthouse security personnel, including unlawful stops, illegal searches, excessive force, and supervisory misconduct. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes. The announcement was the culmination of weeks of internal deliberation, legal review, and political calculation. She watched from the back of the room, dressed in civilian clothes, anonymous among the crowd of observers. Her role in the investigation would become public eventually, but for now, her face was not yet known to the general public. The viral video showed her from angles that obscured her features. Her name had been redacted from court documents under a protective order. The U.S. Attorney continued, "In connection with this investigation, 4 individuals have been indicted on federal civil rights charges. Sergeant Gage Morton faces 4 counts of deprivation of rights under color of law. Deputy Chief Sloan Avery has been indicted on charges of obstruction of justice and conspiracy to deprive citizens of civil rights. 2 additional officers, Bailiff Wells Hart and Deputy Dorian Pike, face charges related to evidence tampering and unlawful detention." The room erupted with questions. The U.S. Attorney fielded them with the careful precision of someone who understood that every word would be analyzed, quoted, and dissected. "Is this connected to the viral video from October?" The video showing an assault on a civilian witness was part of the evidence that precipitated this investigation. However, the pattern or practice review is focused on systemic issues extending far beyond any single incident. What about the woman who was assaulted? Who is she? The victim's identity is protected under a court order. What I can tell you is that she cooperated fully with our investigation, and her testimony was crucial in establishing the evidentiary foundation for these charges. Will there be more arrests? The investigation is ongoing. Additional charges may be filed as evidence warrants. She slipped out of the press conference before it ended. The noise of questions and camera shutters faded as she walked through the federal building's marble corridors, past security checkpoints, into the gray November afternoon. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sergeant Vance, the internal affairs investigator who had taken her statement after the assault. "Just saw the press conference. Good work." She typed back a brief response. "Still a lot to do." Vance's reply came quickly. "No. But this is a start. First time I've seen real consequences in 15 years. Real consequences." The phrase stayed with her as she walked to her car. Morton was in federal custody, facing up to 10 years if convicted. Avery had been suspended without pay, his pension frozen pending the outcome of his case. Hart and Pike were out on bail, but barred from the courthouse. It was more accountability than most victims of police misconduct ever saw. More than the 43 people whose cases she had documented had ever expected. And yet, she thought about the press conference, the careful language, the emphasis on ongoing investigation, the implication that this was a matter of a few bad actors rather than a systemic problem. Morton had 17 complaints against him. 14 of them had been investigated by Avery, his supervisor. All of them had been ruled unfounded. The system that had enabled Morton's violence had been in place for years, perhaps decades. It had not emerged from nowhere. The arrests were a start, but arresting 4 people would not change a culture, would not reform an institution, would not prevent the next Morton from emerging, the next Avery from protecting him. That would take something more, something longer, something harder. The weeks that followed were consumed by the machinery of prosecution. Grand jury testimony, evidence authentication, witness preparation, the slow, grinding work of building a federal case that would withstand the inevitable appeals and challenges. Morton's trial was scheduled for September of the following year, 11 months away. His attorneys filed motion after motion seeking to suppress evidence, challenge jurisdiction, exclude witnesses. Each motion required response. Each response required hours of research and preparation. She testified before the grand jury 3 times, describing her investigation, identifying documents, authenticating recordings. Each session lasted hours. Each one required her to relive the moments she had documented, the violations she had witnessed, the assault she had endured. The other victims testified as well. 43 people. Most of them black, most of them from working-class backgrounds, most of them with histories that defense attorneys would try to use against them. People who had been arrested on fabricated charges. People who had been beaten during routine stops. People who had watched evidence planted on them, watched their complaints dismissed, watched the system close ranks against their claims of innocence. Their testimony was the heart of the case. Not her undercover work, Not the documents and spreadsheets and surveillance reports, but the human cost, the lives disrupted, the trauma endured, the faith in justice destroyed and, perhaps, slowly being rebuilt. One witness in particular stayed with her. A woman named Denise Holloway, 47 years old, a grandmother who had been arrested 3 years ago on drug charges that were later dropped when the supposed evidence could not be located. She had lost her job during the weeks she spent in jail awaiting trial, lost her apartment, lost custody of her grandchildren for 6 months while the system sorted out its mistake. 4 years, Denise said during her testimony. 4 years I've been waiting for someone to believe me, for someone to say that what happened to me was wrong, that I wasn't crazy for knowing I didn't do anything. She had not expected the investigation to change anything, Denise explained. She had given up on change, but when the FBI contacted her, when they showed her the documentation of other victims with similar stories, when they explained that they were building a case that might actually hold people accountable, something had shifted. I didn't think it was possible, Denise said. I thought they always won, the people with the badges, the people with the power. I thought that's just how it works. She paused, looked at the grand jurors, at the prosecutors, at the court reporter transcribing every word. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it doesn't always have to work that way. On a Thursday evening in early December, 6 weeks after the DOJ announcement, she sat in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the courthouse that had been the focus of her investigation for more than 2 years. The same courthouse where Morton had assaulted her. The same building where 43 victims had been mistreated, abused, and denied their rights. She was reading the newspaper. The local section contained an article about the Sheriff's Department's new reform initiative, mandatory body camera policies, civilian oversight board appointments, enhanced training requirements, the kind of changes that were announced in response to scandals, implemented partially, and often quietly abandoned when public attention moved elsewhere. The sheriff himself had given a quote for the article. "We are committed to transparency and accountability. The actions of a few individuals do not reflect the values of this department." A few individuals. As if the pattern she had documented for 26 months was the work of rogue actors rather than the natural product of a system designed to protect its own. She folded the newspaper, sipped her coffee, thought about what reform actually looked like. Morton awaited trial. Avery had been suspended. Hart and Pike faced charges. The DOJ was conducting a pattern or practice investigation that could result in a consent decree, mandatory federal oversight of the department for years to come. These were victories. Real, tangible victories. More accountability than most victims of police misconduct ever saw. And yet the system that had enabled the misconduct remained largely intact. Different faces would fill the positions vacated by the indicted officers. Different hands would process the paperwork, patrol the hallways, screen the visitors. But the culture, the unwritten rules, the implicit understandings about who deserved protection and who deserved suspicion, those changed slowly, if they changed at all. Her phone buzzed. A call from Sergeant Vance. "Agent Okonkwo, I need to tell you something." She set down her coffee. "I'm listening." "Avery's attorney filed a motion today. They're trying to seal his personnel records. There's something in his internal affairs file from 2018, something they really don't want coming out." "What kind of something?" "That's the thing. I tried to access the file. IA 2018-0091. It's completely redacted. Even our office can't see it. Just a case number and a disposition line that says resolved, see attached. There's no attachment." She processed this. A sealed file. A missing attachment. A case from 6 years ago that someone had gone to considerable lengths to bury. Who was the complainant? Blacked out. Everything's blacked out except the case number and the word resolved. What about the investigating officer? That's the interesting part. Vance paused. The IO line shows 2 signatures were required for closure. 2. That's not standard procedure. Usually it's just the investigating sergeant and 1 supervisor. Who signed? First signature is Avery. That's visible. The second signature is completely redacted. Someone with enough authority to demand their name be removed from a closed case file. 2 signatures. Someone senior enough to override normal procedures. Someone whose involvement in a 6-year-old complaint was sensitive enough to require redaction. "Keep digging," she said. "Document everything you find, even if it's just the absence of documents." "I will." "But Agent Okonkwo," Vance hesitated. "You should know. The people who redacted that file, they're still here, still in positions of authority. Whatever happened in 2018, they're still protecting it." She ended the call, sat in the coffee shop as the evening light faded and the street lamps flickered on. Thought about sealed files and missing attachments and the layers of protection that powerful people could construct around their secrets. 26 months of investigation, 4 indictments, a DOJ pattern or practice review, and still pieces missing, threads dangling. A case from 6 years ago that someone was desperate to keep buried. The work was not finished. Perhaps it never would be. This investigation is far from over. Hit that like button if you want to see justice finally served, and make sure you're subscribed, because the revelations ahead are going to shock you. The next morning, her phone buzzed with a text from an unexpected source. The courthouse janitor, Marcus, the older man who had nodded at her with unusual deference during her confrontation with Avery's team. She had interviewed Marcus 2 years ago in the early months of her investigation. His nephew had been beaten during a traffic stop, arrested on fabricated charges, held for 72 hours before being released without explanation. Marcus had wanted to file a complaint, but fear had stopped him. Fear of retaliation, fear of losing his job, fear that speaking up would only make things worse. The text was brief. "My nephew ready to talk now." She forwarded the message to Vance immediately, then typed a response to Marcus. "Can you meet today?" His reply came within minutes. "Park behind the library. 2 p.m. She was there at 1:45. The park was nearly empty, a small green space between the library and a row of commercial buildings. Marcus arrived at 2 exactly, accompanied by a young man in his mid-20s who walked with a slight limp. "Agent Okonkwo." Marcus extended his hand. "This is my nephew, Jerome." Jerome's handshake was tentative. His eyes carried the wariness of someone who had learned not to trust people in authority. "Thank you for meeting with me," she said. "I know this isn't easy." "Uncle Marcus says you're different, says you actually went after them." Jerome looked at the ground. "I didn't believe him at first, thought it was just another setup." "What changed your mind?" "I saw the video, the one of Morton hitting you in the courtroom, and you just sat there, calm, said his badge number like you were reading from a phone book." He looked up at her. "That's when I knew you weren't scared of them. And I thought maybe, if you weren't scared, maybe I could stop being scared too." They sat on a bench at the edge of the park. Jerome told his story. The traffic stop 3 years ago. The deputies who had pulled him over for a broken taillight, then claimed to smell marijuana, then searched his car without consent. The punches and kicks when he had objected. The charges that had been filed, resisting arrest, drug possession, assault on an officer, all of which had been quietly dropped 6 months later when no evidence could be produced. "They took my phone," Jerome said. "I was recording when they stopped me. They took my phone and it just disappeared. Never got it back. No record of it in evidence." "Do you remember the names of the officers involved?" Jerome nodded slowly. "One of them was Morton, Sergeant Morton. He was the one who hit me the hardest." She made notes, asked clarifying questions, documented everything with the careful precision that had become second nature. "Jerome, I have to ask, why didn't you come forward earlier, when we first started investigating?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at his uncle, at the older man who had watched his nephew beaten and had said nothing because he was afraid. "Because I thought it wouldn't matter. Because I thought nobody cared what happened to people like me. Because every time I saw a cop, I remembered what they did, and I thought, they won. They always win. Why fight it?" He turned back to her. "But then I saw you on that floor, and you didn't stay down, you didn't cry, you didn't beg, you just documented him, like you were building a case right there on the ground." He shook his head slowly. And I thought, if she can do that after he just hit her in the face, then maybe I can do something too. Maybe I can stop being scared and start being angry. The right kind of angry. The kind that does something instead of just hurting. She reached into her bag, pulled out a card with the number for the U.S. Attorney's Victim Advocate Office. I'm going to connect you with prosecutors who are building the case against Morton. Your testimony could be important. But I want you to know, whatever happens at trial, whatever the verdict is, what happened to you was wrong, it mattered, and you're not alone. Jerome took the card, looked at it for a long moment, then he put it carefully in his wallet, as if it were something precious. Thank you, he said, for believing me. The winter months passed in the grinding rhythm of federal prosecution. Depositions, motions, counter-motions. The legal machinery moved at its own pace, indifferent to the urgency of those caught in its gears. Morton's trial date was pushed back twice, first to October, then to December. His attorneys argued for additional time to review the government's evidence, which now numbered over 400,000 pages of documents, 1,200 hours of video footage, and testimony from 63 witnesses. She continued her work in the Civil Rights Division, assigned to new cases even as the Grand County prosecution moved forward. Other courthouses, other departments, other patterns of misconduct documented by other agents working other investigations. The problem was not unique to Grand County. That was the hardest lesson of her 11 years in this work. The pattern she had documented was replicated in cities across the country. Different names, different faces, the same abuses, the same protections, the same institutional resistance to accountability. But Grand County was hers. These victims were hers. This fight was the one she had chosen. In February, the Department of Justice issued its preliminary findings from the pattern or practice investigation. 47 pages documenting systemic failures in supervision, training, and accountability. Recommendations for reform that would take years to implement fully. The sheriff held another press conference. More promises, more commitments to change, more carefully worded statements that acknowledged problems without accepting blame. The Civilian Oversight Board held its first meeting, appointed by the county commission, composed of community members with no subpoena power and no investigative authority. A gesture toward accountability that satisfied the demands of public relations without threatening the fundamental structures of power. She watched from a distance, documented the reforms that were announced and the reforms that were actually implemented, noted the gap between rhetoric and reality. Change was slow, incomplete, frustrating, but it was happening. Incrementally, imperfectly, but happening. In March, Morton's attorney filed a motion to suppress the video evidence from the courtroom assault. The argument was technical, focused on chain of custody issues and questions about whether the civilian recordings had been properly authenticated. The motion was denied. Judge Ross wrote a 12-page opinion explaining that the footage had been obtained from social media platforms where it had been posted by witnesses, that authentication requirements had been satisfied, and that the defense's objections were, quote, without merit, end quote. The trial was set for December. Jury selection would begin on December 2nd. She would testify, not as an undercover agent, but as a victim. The woman who had been assaulted in open court, who had remained calm, who had documented her attacker's badge number from the floor. The role was unfamiliar. She was accustomed to being the investigator, the documenter, the one who compiled evidence for others to present. Being the victim required a different kind of strength, a willingness to be vulnerable, to be seen, to admit that she had been hurt. But she had been hurt. Morton's slap had left bruises that took weeks to fade. The assault had left other marks, invisible ones, that emerged in unexpected moments. A flinch when someone approached from behind, a tension in her shoulders when she entered courthouses, the dreams that sometimes woke her at 3 a.m., replaying the moment when his palm connected with her face. She had learned, over years of this work, that trauma did not care about professional credentials. You could be an FBI agent, trained in tactics and self-defense and emotional control, and still be hurt by violence. Still carry the weight of what had been done to you. The difference was what you did with that weight, whether you let it crush you or used it to fuel something larger. She chose fuel. On a Tuesday evening in April, 7 months after the DOJ announcement, she received an email that changed everything. The sender's address was unfamiliar, generic, the kind of address you create when you want to communicate without being traced. The subject line read, IA 2018-0091. The body of the email contained one sentence. Avery wasn't the only one who signed off. Below the text was an attachment, a PDF file. She opened it carefully on a secure system designed to detect malware. The document was a single page, a heavily redacted internal affairs file cover sheet, case number IA 2018-0091. The case that Vance had been unable to access. Most of the page was blacked out. Complainant name, incident description, findings, all redacted. But at the bottom, in the signature block, something was visible that had not been visible in the official version Vance had accessed. 2 signatures, as Vance had described. The first was Avery's, clearly visible. The second had been redacted, but the redaction had been done carelessly. The edges of the black bar did not quite cover the signature line. She could see, just barely visible beneath the redaction, the first 3 letters of a name. Shay. 3 letters. Not enough to identify someone definitively, but enough to narrow the possibilities. Enough to suggest that someone named Shaw, or Shapiro, or Shannon, or any number of other names beginning with those letters, had been involved in closing a complaint 6 years ago. Someone important enough that their involvement required redaction, someone who was still protecting that secret now. She forwarded the email to the secure server used by her team. Added a note. Need to identify second signatory. Priority. The response came within the hour. Working on it. Be careful. Whoever sent this wants you looking in a specific direction. She understood the warning. Anonymous tips were useful, but they were also tools. Someone was feeding her information for a reason. That reason might be justice. It might be something else entirely. But the information was real. The redacted file was real. And somewhere in that file was a secret that someone had gone to considerable lengths to bury. She would find it. Whatever it took. Chapter. The investigation into IA 2018-0091 consumed her off hours for the next 3 months. She filed FOIA requests, interviewed retired officers, searched archived records that had been scheduled for destruction but hadn't quite made it to the shredder. The picture that emerged was fragmentary but disturbing. In January of 2018, someone had filed a complaint against the Grand County Sheriff's Office. The nature of the complaint was unclear, but it had been serious enough to require investigation at the internal affairs level. Avery had been assigned to investigate. Someone else, whose name began with SHA, had co-signed the closure. The complaint had been ruled resolved. But unlike other resolved complaints, this one had no documentation of what the resolution actually entailed, no discipline records, no findings of fact, just the word resolved and a reference to an attachment that did not exist. In July, she found the break she had been looking for. A retired secretary from the sheriff's office, a woman named Barbara Chen, who had worked in the administrative division for 30 years, agreed to meet with her. Barbara was in her 70s now, living in a retirement community an hour outside the city. She had nothing to lose by talking, she said, and she had been carrying something for too long. They met in Barbara's small apartment, surrounded by photographs of grandchildren and cats. Barbara served tea and spoke in a voice that trembled with age and something else. "I remember that case," Barbara said. 2018, January. A young woman came in to file a complaint. She was shaking, crying. I thought she'd been attacked. What was the complaint about? Barbara set down her teacup. Her hands were not entirely steady. She said she'd been assaulted by an officer, not beaten. The other kind of assault. The words hung in the air, the other kind of assault. Who was the officer? I don't know his name. She told the intake sergeant, not me, but I remember what happened after, how fast everything moved, how quickly the file disappeared from the system. Do you remember who handled the case? Avery. He came down personally to take the file. That was unusual. IA cases usually stayed with the investigators, but this one, Avery took it himself, said it was sensitive, said it needed to be handled carefully. And the second signature? The one that was redacted? Barbara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Sheriff Shaw. Patrick Shaw. He was the sheriff back then. Retired 2 years ago. Moved to Florida. Shaw. The 3 letters visible beneath the redaction. Why would the sheriff personally sign off on an IA complaint closure? Because it involved one of his people, someone close to him, someone he needed to protect. Who? Barbara shook her head slowly. I don't know. But I know it wasn't the first time. Wasn't the last time either. Files disappeared. Complaints got lost. Anything that threatened the inner circle just vanished. She leaned forward. I'm telling you this because I watched it happen for 30 years. Watched good officers get pushed out for speaking up. Watched bad officers get promoted for staying quiet. And I never said anything because I was scared. Because I had a pension to protect. Because I told myself it wasn't my fight. She looked at the photographs on her wall, her grandchildren, her life. But I'm old now, and I'm tired of carrying it. Tired of knowing what I know and pretending I don't. The discovery of Patrick Shaw's involvement opened new avenues of investigation. Shaw had retired from the sheriff's office in 2022, 1 year before the incidents that had brought Morton and Avery to federal attention. He was living in Sarasota now, enjoying his pension, presumably beyond the reach of consequences. But retirement did not confer immunity from federal investigation, and the pattern that had become clear, a pattern of suppressing complaints, protecting abusers, systematically denying justice to victims, had its roots in decisions made during Shaw's tenure. She briefed her supervisors. Additional resources were allocated. A team began the process of tracing Shaw's involvement in other closed complaints, other disappeared files, other victims who had been silenced. The scope of the investigation was expanding. Not just Morton, not just Avery, but the entire system that had created and protected them. We're getting closer to the truth now. Make sure you're subscribed because the conclusion of this case is going to change everything you thought you knew about how justice works. Morton's trial began on December 2nd, 11 months after she had been assaulted in Courtroom 4B. The federal courthouse was more crowded than usual. Media vans lined the street outside. Protesters had gathered, carrying signs demanding accountability. The case had become a symbol, one of those rare moments when public attention focused on the systems that usually operated in obscurity. She was not called to testify until the 3rd day. The prosecution had built its case methodically, presenting documentary evidence first, then witness testimony, then finally the victim herself. When she took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. Cameras were not permitted, but sketch artists captured the moment. The FBI agent who had been assaulted sitting calmly in the witness box, answering questions with the same precise composure she had demonstrated when Morton struck her. The direct examination was straightforward. She described the events of October 17th, the harassment at security, the repeated demands for identification, the assault in the courtroom. She described staying calm, documenting the assault, reciting Morton's badge number from the floor. Why didn't you defend yourself? The prosecutor asked. You're trained in defensive tactics. You could have fought back. Fighting back would have escalated the situation. It would have given him justification for further violence. And it would have compromised the documentation I was creating. You chose documentation over self-defense? I chose effectiveness. The video of him hitting me, of me staying calm and reciting his badge number, that video was seen by 12 million people. It created accountability that fighting back never would have. The cross-examination was aggressive, as she had expected. Morton's attorney tried to paint her as an agent provocateur, someone who had deliberately provoked the assault to further her investigation. "Isn't it true that you wanted my client to hit you?" "No." "You spent 26 months investigating him. You were looking for evidence of misconduct, and then, conveniently, he provides exactly the evidence you need, right in open court." "Your client made his own choices. I simply documented them." "You could have shown ID. You could have complied with requests. You could have avoided the entire confrontation." "I could have surrendered my constitutional rights to make your client's life easier. I chose not to." "And as a result, he assaulted you." "As a result, he revealed exactly who he is. Someone who uses violence against people who refuse to submit to his authority." The attorney tried other angles, challenged her credibility, questioned her motives, suggested that the entire investigation had been a personal vendetta. None of it landed. The evidence was too strong, the video too clear, the pattern too well documented. When she stepped down from the witness stand, she felt something she had not expected. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just exhaustion. The exhaustion of carrying this case for more than 2 years, of documenting 43 victims, of enduring an assault and its aftermath, of watching a system slowly, grudgingly, imperfectly bend toward accountability. The exhaustion of fighting a fight that would never be completely won. The jury deliberated for 4 days. She waited in her office, unable to concentrate on other work. Her phone was silent. The news coverage was constant, analysts parsing every moment of testimony, predicting outcomes, filling airtime with speculation. On the morning of the 5th day, the verdict came. Guilty, on all 4 counts. Morton was remanded to federal custody pending sentencing. He faced up to 40 years in prison under federal guidelines. She watched the verdict on her computer screen in the quiet of her office, saw Morton's face when the verdict was read. The shock, the disbelief, the realization, finally, that the system he had relied on to protect him had failed. She did not feel triumph. She felt something more complicated. Sadness, perhaps, for the 43 victims who had waited years for this moment, for the system that had made Morton possible, for the long road that still lay ahead. But also hope, small, fragile, but present. Justice was possible. Not always, not completely, but sometimes. When people were willing to document, to persist, to refuse to give up even when the system was designed to discourage them, sometimes the system could be held accountable. Jill. The sentencing hearing was held 3 months later. Morton received 18 years in federal prison. He would be eligible for parole after 15. Avery's case was still pending. His attorneys had filed multiple motions to dismiss, citing lack of direct involvement in the assault. The prosecution was building a separate case focused on obstruction of justice and civil rights conspiracy. Shaw remained in Florida, watching from a distance. The investigation into his involvement was ongoing, but the evidence was circumstantial. He might never face charges, or he might. The work continued. The consent decree was finalized in June, 18 months after the DOJ had opened its pattern or practice investigation. Federal monitors would oversee the Grand County Sheriff's Office for a minimum of 5 years. Mandatory reforms included enhanced training, civilian oversight with actual authority, and independent review of all use-of-force incidents. The reforms would take years to implement. Some would be effective. Others would be quietly ignored. The culture that had enabled Morton and Avery would not change overnight, if it changed at all. But the foundation had been laid. The precedent had been set. And somewhere in some other courthouse, some other officer might think twice before striking a woman who refused to show ID, might remember what happened to Morton, might choose differently. That was the hope. Small, uncertain, but real. On a Saturday afternoon in September, more than 2 years after the assault, she sat in her apartment reading a letter. It had arrived in a plain envelope, no return address, handwritten in careful script. Dear Agent Okonkwo, I don't know if you remember me. My name is Denise Holloway. I testified before the grand jury about what happened to me at the courthouse in 2021. I wanted to write to tell you something I couldn't say in the courtroom, something I've been carrying for 4 years. When they arrested me, when they put me in that cell, when I lost my job and my apartment and my grandchildren, I thought my life was over. I thought nobody cared what happened to people like me. I thought they would always win, the people with the badges, the people with the power. I stopped believing in justice. I stopped believing in anything. But then you came. You listened. You wrote everything down. You treated me like my story mattered. And when I saw that video, when I saw you on that floor, saying his badge number like you were reading from a phone book, I cried. Not because you'd been hurt, because you were so calm. Because even when he hit you, you didn't stop documenting. That's when I knew. You weren't going to give up. You weren't going to let them win. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if the system will really change. But I know this. For 4 years, I thought nobody believed me. And you believed me. Whatever happens at trial, whatever the verdict is, that matters. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for believing me. Sincerely, Denise Holloway. She read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in her desk drawer with the others. 42 letters now, from 42 of the 43 victims whose cases she had documented. Each one a reminder of why this work mattered. Each one a human being who had been hurt by a system that was supposed to protect them, and who had found, finally, someone willing to listen. The 43rd victim had not written. He had testified at Morton's trial instead, describing in detail the arrest that had left him with a permanent limp. Jerome, Marcus's nephew, who had been too scared to come forward until he saw the video of her assault, who had stopped being scared and started being angry, the right kind of angry, the kind that did something. That evening, an email arrived from an address she did not recognize. The subject line was empty. The body contained 3 sentences. IA 2018-00991 was not the only file Shaw buried. There are others, 23 others. Check the archives before they finish shredding. She stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she forwarded the email to her team and began typing a request for additional investigative resources, 23 other files, 23 other victims, possibly, 23 other cases that someone had gone to considerable lengths to bury. The work was not finished. Perhaps it never would be. Systems that protected their own did not yield easily to accountability. The people who had enabled Morton and Avery would not disappear with their arrests. They would find new positions, new protections, new ways to avoid consequences. But she would keep documenting, keep investigating, keep building cases, one victim at a time, one file at a time, one piece of evidence at a time. Because that was the work. Not dramatic confrontations or triumphant verdicts, just the patient accumulation of truth, documented and preserved and eventually, sometimes, used to hold power accountable. She closed her laptop, looked out the window at the evening sky, the lights of the city beginning to flicker on against the gathering darkness. Somewhere out there, someone was being harassed at a courthouse. Someone was being beaten during a traffic stop. Someone was watching their complaint disappear into a system designed to protect abusers. And somewhere, hopefully, someone was documenting it. Someone was building a case. Someone was refusing to give up, even when the system was designed to discourage them. The fight continued. It always continued. She would be ready. 3 days later, her phone rang at 6:15 in the morning. She was already awake, already dressed, already reviewing the files that had arrived overnight from the archives. The caller ID showed Vance's number. Agent Okonkwo, we found something. The archives? Yes, 23 files, just like the email said, all from Shaw's tenure, all closed as resolved with no documentation, all involving complaints against officers who were later promoted. She set down her coffee. Any connection to current cases? One file stands out, IA 2016-0044. Complaint against an officer named Mitchell, David Mitchell. He was a deputy back then. He's now chief of police in the next county over. Chief of police. Appointed 2 years ago, after Shaw retired and recommended him for the position. She processed this, a pattern extending beyond Grand County, a network of protection that crossed jurisdictional lines. What was the complaint? Excessive force, witness tampering. Sound familiar? It sounded exactly like the pattern she had documented for more than 2 years. The same abuses, the same protections, the same institutional resistance to accountability. I'll brief the team this morning. We're going to need more resources. Agent Okonkwo. Vance's voice was quiet, almost hesitant. How far does this go? How many departments? How many officers? She looked at the files spread across her desk, the letters from victims in her drawer, the email promising 23 more buried cases. I don't know, she said, but we're going to find out. She ended the call. Sat in the morning light, surrounded by evidence of a system that had failed countless people for countless years. The work continued. It would always continue, but today there was hope. Small, fragile, but present, because somewhere, in a federal prison, Morton was serving the first day of his 18-year sentence. Because somewhere, in a retirement community, Barbara Chen was sleeping peacefully for the first time in years. Because somewhere, in a small apartment, Denise Holloway was reading a letter from her grandchildren, returned to her care after 4 years of waiting. Because sometimes, against all odds, justice prevailed. Not always, not completely, but sometimes. And sometimes was enough to keep fighting for. The morning sun rose over the city. Traffic began to flow. People went about their lives, unaware of the systems operating around them, the invisible structures that determined whose complaints were heard and whose were buried. She gathered her files, prepared for the briefing, readied herself for the next phase of an investigation that had already consumed 2 years of her life and would likely consume many more. The fight was far from over. Morton was just one officer in one department in one county. Shaw was just one sheriff in one network. The system that had protected them extended further than she could yet see, reaching into other departments, other jurisdictions, other levels of power. But she had something the system did not expect: patience, documentation, the willingness to keep digging, keep filing, keep building cases even when the obstacles seemed insurmountable. She had 43 victims who had trusted her with their stories, 23 more files waiting to be examined, and somewhere in the archives of departments across the state, countless other files that someone had tried to bury. The truth was there. It always was, hidden under redactions and sealed files and convenient disappearances, but there. Her job was to find it, document it, preserve it until the moment when it could be used. The work continued. It would always continue, and she would be ready.
Wie ein Held zum Siege Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you found the content helpful, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. We are always here to listen.